From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now, or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. Everybody agrees this stone exists. It has something carved upon it, right? It has something carved into the face of the stone. If you look at pictures of this, which are widely available online, you'll see that the front face looks partially damaged. So it's possible there was more to this original message. And now we get to the very strange part. We know what the message says, sort of. We have a bunch of linguists who have been looking at this since 1899, at least, and they agree, kind of, on this message. But Olaf first, he didn't, according to him, he initially thought that this was some kind of Indian almanac, by which he meant Native American almanac. But later people said, wait, those look like runes.
Was that a quotation sound or an engraving sound?
That was a quotation sound.
Okay, cool.
An engraving sound is more like a...
Oh, no, but you made a sound earlier in the episode. Was that a scrubbing sound you made?
That's like a cleaning. That's a...
Okay. All right, I'm just clarifying our sonic terms here.
Right.
Yes. Oh, God. Yeah, it was runes. Runes. You, I don't know. On this show, we've encountered runes many a time. I think most commonly when dealing with research on the Nazi Party. I think, at least for me, that's when a type of runes we've been encountering quite frequently.
Well, the notion that they have power, right? Isn't that part of it?
Right. The words have power in quite a literal way. Runes are... Runes are used in various magical systems or traditional beliefs. They have also been appropriated by political movements or by metal bands.
Yeah.
And maybe they would say that's not appropriation, but in the case of the Nazi Party, it's definitely appropriation.
Well, just from a form factor, from like if you're thinking about fonts or something, the runes such as these there is something about them that is striking, almost in the way the hieroglyphics have the same kind of feel, where it feels like there's more inside whatever's written or inscribed than just letters. It feels that way.
It reminds me of the same with a lot of Asian characters, where there feels like there's an imbued meaning within the system. I mean, it's much more, there's more to it than just a straightforward A shape or a letter. It feels like it's got, you could, in the way that like certain Japanese characters can tell a story, with some brushstrokes, or there's a lot more contained within that one character than with just a letter that would then be used to spell out a word, right?
Yeah, because those are, they're to a degree, I can't speak about Japanese, but I can speak about Chinese a little. They're to a degree pictographic.
Right.
So one word that is, I'm trying to think of a specific example, but the gist is like, you might have one word that means house or whatever, and then you might have another word that somehow means something in a house, and the character is like visually inside the house. I'm not saying that specifically in Japanese, but I see what you're saying, that visual depiction of a concept rather than an instruction on how to make a sound with your mouth. Runes are crazy. I've been watching like 1 to 2 Halloween movies a day in October. And I stumbled upon a film that I'd never heard of called Spell, which is about a guy with OCD whose spouse passes away. None of this is a spoiler. And so he just sort of impulsively goes to Iceland, and he gets really wrapped up in Icelandic folklore and runes. And I fell into the rabbit hole of Icelandic traditional beliefs. And I spent like 2 hours this past weekend wondering how we could make it a stuff they don't want you to know episode until I said, I'm just going to have to be content to name drop that thing because there's not a conspiracy.
First place I ever remember hearing about runes was in the Hobbit movie, where the one of the gnomes is like, "Those are rune stones," you know. That was the first, and like, you know, because they do have power. They're also in a lot of obviously like RPG type games. They're in Legend of Zelda. They're a way you can power up a sword by adding a rune stone to it that gives it a special property or whatever. Outside the scope of today's discussion, but still, the point is that language can be imbued with meaning and power in the right hands, at least in theory.
I really hope some of you also teleported on runes in Ultima Online the way I did, because that was one of my favorite things. So let's just talk about these runes for a little bit. Runes in general, it's an ancient North European writing system, right? It's probably first developed in the 2nd century CE and most likely under Roman influence. They were also taught in several places throughout the world, specifically in Scandinavian schools. School children in the 19th century were learning what runes were, at least in a general sense, in early education in that way, more as a history lesson, I think. I mean, that's my understanding. It would be more of a, let's learn about our history, our past.
It's a Scholomance thing. They're teaching those kids spells.
Oh, I
They're
mean, I
teaching
hope.
them occult power over the elements, how to find fortune and love and lay enemies to waste. No, you're right, though. Runes are a real thing. They're very, very popular in fiction, but they are very much a real thing, and they were taught in various parts of Scandinavia to school children in the 1800s, at least. We know that for sure. So here is the translation. This is a generally accepted translation. There are going to be people who go back and forth about the specifics here, but it's like it's a confession. We don't need a prologue. Here it is. So it says this: we are 8 Goths and 22 Norwegians on an exploration valley from Vinland through the west. We had camp by a lake with 2 skerries, that's small rocky islands, 1 day's journey north from this stone. We were out and fished one day. After we came home, we found 10 of our men red with blood and dead. AVM, standing probably for Ave Virgo Maria or Hail Virgin Mary, save us from evil. We have 10 of our party by the sea to look after our ships. 14 days' journey from this island. Year 1362.
Whoa, 1362. These runes are describing a couple of different journeys that were taken, but one specific exploration journey. I like how they put that. From Vinland through the west. We're gonna spend some
Vinland?
time.
Is that the same as Finland?
We're gonna spend some time discussing what that may or may not mean. I'm sure.
Okay.
Where is Vinland, you say? But yeah, really interesting stuff. Like giving almost in sunken treasure or in hidden treasure map kind of vibe. Like we're this distance away from this stone from where we were. We're also this other distance in this other direction away from this stone for this other thing. Fascinating that this message would end up etched in stone in this place.
Yeah. Talking about potentially magical artifacts found in Minnesota, not too terribly far from Minneapolis, where we know a magical creature once dwelled. Prince, the purple one, but unrelated to any Goths or Norwegians that I know of. But the Minneapolis Journal actually scooped the Swedish paper that we discussed, the Swedish language paper that we discussed earlier, on that translation, referencing said Goths and Norwegians, 8 and 22 in number, and it was kind of a thing. The stone itself was put on display in a bank, although this account that we found on the internet incorrectly refers to the bank as a drugstore. And it's super important to note that Olaf Omen never actually was looking to get paid for his discovery. The Minnesota Historical Society actually has a bill of sale showing that Ullman sold the stone to them for $10 American in 1911, which would be around $300 in 2020, closer to $260.
Wow.
So what's the deal? Where do the fact and the fiction meet? And of which is there more? is the question I think we have for today.
The first thing I would put forward is, who's to say it wasn't a combination bank and drugstore? I mean, everybody's seen those.
Money is a drug.
You certainly will see banks in grocery stores and drugs and pharmacies in grocery stores, though I cannot say I have ever, Matt, seen a bank in a freestanding drugstore.
There is a point, though, that I don't want to lose before we get too far from the translation, and that is that the Goths are Swedes. Goth is a word for Swede. They're not they're not the motley crew from Letterkenny or South Park.
They're not demure Cure fans, with emo haircuts and potential like chain mail belts or something like that. Black fingernail polish.
They may have had chainmail. But
that's true.
Yeah,
likely on more than their belts, though. I would.
I would imagine so, unless it was something of religious or spiritual, cultural significance. Yeah, this is an excellent question about fact versus fiction, because if the Kensington Runestone is what its believers say it is, and if the message on it is true and is from 1362, then it's hugely important for our understanding of North American history. Forget that, of world history. This would be a big deal, because how would this group of Swedish people and Norwegian people, Vikings working together, how would they reach the Midwest from Vinland, right? Even though they say they did it at a great personal cost, they paid in blood for this trip. It's still a long journey. Maybe we should pause for just a second to talk about Vinland. We've been throwing this around. You've probably heard of Greenland. You've probably heard of Iceland, and maybe the nifty little story behind their names. Vinland is kind of in that same headspace. It's an area of North America that was explored by Norse Vikings. Leif Erikson landed there around 1000 CE. So, you don't have to be a math doctor to know that's way before Columbus.
I mean, it's incredible to have that inscribed, allegedly in the 1300s. So I guess what I'm trying to wrap my head around, I was reading this story from the Minnesota Post, and they're discussing Vinland and the route through the West from Vinland and where that would be from, where it would actually be located. And I'm genuinely a little bit confused, because it seems as though it's a bit unknown where Vinland is. Ben, do we have, maybe I just don't have it in my research, like actually where it is located in current U.S.?
Yeah, so right now, the popular consensus is that what was described as Vinland by Leif Erikson and co. is probably an area that includes Newfoundland and the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and maybe goes as far as New Brunswick. So really, it's Canadian.
Okay.
But it is a wide range, and it is accepted as fact that these people arrived there in 1000 CE. We just don't know what happened in the 1300s.
Well, and if you definitely want to learn an historically accurate account of what Vinland was, there is an anime manga series called Vinland Saga. So that would be the place to go. I'm kidding, but it is interesting when a country like Japan, portrays a culture like the Viking type situation. It's very, I don't know. I'm intrigued by this because it does appear to be like Viking ships and swords and that kind of hijinks. So it looks pretty interesting. But so what land mass would we attribute it to? Like, does it still exist, or? I'm having a hard time finding anything about. Oh, it's just North America, just part of it. Okay, interesting.
It would be like the upper upper eastern coast of the North American continent. But from what we know in the earliest accounts of Vinland, it was described as, it was first written about in 1075, and it was described as these remote islands. So imagine you get close, you find some islands, and you think, we've gone really far. We should turn around. They didn't really, from what we understand, they did not know the enormity of the landmass that they were very, very close to. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Sure does.
So Vinland, at this point, is, we should also say, it's the idea of these early Viking explorers in 1000 CE. It's a very popular idea. It's in a lot of conversation. It's in the zeitgeist in the 1890s in Europe and in the US. So someone would probably know, someone in Minnesota would have heard this story, especially given the massive Swedish population. They would have been familiar with this. And that's why it got so much interest from the media. There was a flurry of investigations. We're talking scholars and linguists. They dive into this description. They're fighting back and forth. Like, what kind of runic system is this? How old is it? That's the big question, right? And then historians and scientists are doing the same kind of thing that we were just doing, where they're essentially pulling up a map and they're going, okay, fictional boat. How does it get to Minnesota? You know what I mean?
Well, dude, it's fascinating if you just read that translation. Doesn't it call the place where the tablet ends up an island and not just a hill? Mm-hmm. Right? So that alone makes the mind start wondering, well, wait, was this flooded? And unless you know the historical record of the area, you have extremely accurate information on that, your mind may think, well, perhaps it was. A lot of this was flooded at some point, even if it was only on a temporary basis, to where this whole area could be traversed by ship or by boat rather than on foot on land. Yeah,
it's a good point. I mean, we know that geography can change, right? Especially over time. That's the thing. If you're hearing about this and you're not a scholar of ancient languages that are somewhat obscure, and if you're not a forensic expert or a professional historian, then this sounds like it's, at the very least, it sounds like it's an interesting thing, and it sounds very possible. The stone itself ended up getting sent to some professionals, especially one Professor George O. Kerm, who was a philologist at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. And so he looks at it. He looks at this draft people are figuring out about based on what we know about the inscription. And when he looks at this first draft, he's got a little spark of hope, right? Are we about to learn more about hidden history? But then he inspected the language on the stone itself. You know, when he did a firsthand investigation, he got really, really puzzled. And it led him and many others to ask, what the heck is going on? What is the provenance of this stone? Here's where it gets crazy. Okay, we got to say it. It's fake.
What?
No.
Yeah.
Just like that. It gets crazy. It's fake.
It gets a little crazier than that, but the stone itself is 98.99% a hoax. At least it might be an historical hoax, like the Shroud of Turin or something. Spoilers, but this is proven pretty definitively. There are big problems with the stories. There's not just problems with the story of the farmer finding it. There's a problem with the story that's on the stone.
Map problems, right? Like route problems. You know.
Mm-hmm.
And the farmer selling it for $10, even if it was $260. Come on, this thing's incredible. $10.